In a quiet corner of California, Clint Eastwood, one of Hollywood's most legendary figures, lives a life far removed from the bright lights of the movie set. To the outside world, he's a tough, no-nonsense icon, known for his iconic roles in westerns and action films. But what many don't know is that Clint Eastwood is a man who lives by his own rules. A group of thieves, eager for their next big score, had no idea who they were about to target. They saw Clint Eastwood as just another wealthy celebrity, a name they recognized but didn't truly understand. The plan seemed simple: get in, get the money, and get out. What they didn't realize was that messing with Clint Eastwood would turn out to be their biggest mistake. They were about to learn the hard way that Clint was far more than just a movie star. This time, they had picked the wrong person to mess with. The group of thieves wasn't exactly a well-known crew. They were small-time criminals, always on the lookout for their next opportunity. They'd pulled off a few minor heists here and there, but nothing big. Nothing that would set them up for life. That's when one of them, a man named Mike, suggested Clint Eastwood. Mike had seen Clint on TV and knew he was wealthy. He'd been in the business for decades. To Mike, Clint seemed like an easy target. He was older now, in his 90s, and Mike figured a man of that age would be easy to take advantage of. The idea sounded good to the others in the crew. They weren't thinking about Clint's background or the fact that he wasn't just a movie character. They saw a man with a lot of money and thought they could get it without any trouble. They spent days planning. They researched his house, the area around it, and his daily routine. Clint lived in a secluded spot, far from the city's noise, and they thought that meant he wouldn't have any security or watchful eyes nearby. They thought they could get in, take what they wanted, and be gone before anyone knew they'd been there. It was a foolproof plan, or so they thought. But as the group put the finishing touches on their plan, they overlooked one crucial detail. They didn't understand that Clint Eastwood wasn't the kind of person to leave himself unprotected. They didn't know that Clint wasn't just an actor. He was a man who had lived through countless dangerous situations, in his movies, and in real life. Clint Eastwood wasn't the type to flaunt his wealth or live extravagantly. His lifestyle was simple, almost humble, especially for someone with his fame and fortune. He lived in a quiet, remote part of California, away from the prying eyes of Hollywood. It wasn't a mansion surrounded by fences or guards. Instead, it was a modest ranch, a place where Clint could enjoy the peace and quiet he craved. Despite his quiet life, Clint was always alert, always paying attention. He'd spent years in Hollywood, working in films that often required him to deal with dangerous situations. He was no stranger to dealing with the unexpected. In fact, his calm, collected nature was one of the reasons he had survived in the industry for so long. He had a sharp mind and a strong sense of awareness that many people didn't realize. The thieves, however, didn't see that. They saw an old man, a movie star with plenty of money. They figured he would have a simple life without any real defense. They couldn't have been more wrong. Clint wasn't the type to show off his skills, but he had a lot of experience, especially when it came to protecting himself. As the thieves carefully observed Clint's routine, they noticed how little he ventured out. He wasn't always out socializing or at public events. But that didn't mean he was unprepared. He had worked hard to create a life of solitude, but he also knew how to keep an eye on things. He wasn't the kind of man to trust everyone around him. What the thieves didn't understand was that Clint had faced real dangers long before they came along. His years in Hollywood had taught him how to stay one step ahead of anyone trying to take advantage of him. They were about to find out that Clint was much more than the cowboy on the screen. The night was supposed to be like any other for Clint. The thieves had watched him long enough to know his habits. They knew he spent most evenings alone, enjoying a quiet dinner, maybe watching TV or reading. This was the perfect time to strike. They arrived at Clint's ranch under the cover of darkness. There were no bright city lights or bustling streets. Only the dim glow of the moon lit their path. Mike, the leader, gave the others a nod. They moved silently, making their way to the back of the house. They thought it would be easy: slip in, grab what they could, and get out without anyone noticing. At first, everything went according to plan. They had disabled the security cameras and disabled the alarm system. At least they thought they had. They crept through the garden, avoiding the lights and staying in the shadows. They reached the back door and began to break in. But just as they were about to enter, something didn't feel right. There was a low hum coming from the area. A faint sound that seemed out of place. Mike motioned for the group to stop. They all froze, listening. They couldn't pinpoint the source, but it was clear Clint had something in place they hadn't accounted for. A nervous tension started to settle in. Still, they pressed forward. They finally made it inside, but things weren't as quiet as they had hoped. The house was still and dark, but there were signs of life. Mike could feel eyes on them, though he couldn't figure out where they were coming from. The sense of unease began to grow. But they pushed forward, creeping through the rooms, searching for valuables. They were focused on the job, too focused to realize how wrong they were. They had underestimated Clint Eastwood, and they were about to learn just how dangerous that mistake would be. As the thieves crept through his house, Clint was already aware of the situation. It wasn't that he had superhuman senses, but his years of living alone had taught him to be keenly aware of everything around him. He had a sense for when something wasn't right, and tonight was no exception. Clint had installed a few security measures around his property, though they weren't the high-tech alarms you might expect from a celebrity home. They were old school. Motion detectors, tripwires, and hidden cameras that had been in place for years. Nothing flashy, nothing obvious. But they worked. Clint had been sitting in his study, reading a book, when the motion sensor near the back door triggered. He didn't panic. Instead, he calmly set his book down and stood up. Clint wasn't a man to rush into action without thinking. He had a plan for situations like this. One he had learned through years of experience, both on-screen and off. He knew he couldn't just walk into the room and confront the thieves head-on. It would be too risky, too noisy. So he decided to wait. He moved through the house, quietly, knowing exactly where to go to avoid detection. He knew the layout inside and out, every door, every window. He had seen everything that needed to be seen. But what he really knew was that the thieves would make mistakes. They were desperate, nervous, and inexperienced. That was the key to turning the situation in his favor. Clint didn't make a sound as he moved through the dark halls. He wasn't in a hurry. He didn't need to be. He knew that eventually, the thieves would come to him. They would slip up. And when they did, he would be ready. As the thieves moved deeper into the house, Clint positioned himself in a spot where he could observe them. He didn't reveal himself yet, choosing to let them get a little further into their plan before he made his move. He wanted them to feel confident, to think they had the upper hand. He wanted them to make that mistake. And when they did, he would be ready to strike. As the minutes ticked by, the thieves grew more and more anxious. They hadn't found anything yet, and the silence around them was unnerving. They were starting to feel the pressure. The house, while seemingly empty, felt like it was alive with eyes watching them at every turn. Mike, the leader, kept glancing over his shoulder, as if expecting someone to jump out from the shadows. The others were no better. Their nerves were getting the best of them, and their movements became more erratic. They started talking louder than they should have, whispering to each other in hurried tones. Clint's years of experience in movies taught him how to read situations like this. And he could tell, by the way they were acting, that they were already on edge. It was then that one of the thieves, a younger man named Dave, made his first mistake. He knocked over a small table in the hallway, the clattering sound echoing through the empty house. The group froze, holding their breath. But it was too late. The noise had already made it clear they weren't as quiet as they thought. Mike cursed under his breath. He motioned for the others to move, but the tension was building. Dave's mistake had set off a chain reaction. The group became more paranoid, more careless. Every little sound seemed amplified. Every creak of the floorboards felt like a warning. They began to make more noise as they moved through the house, no longer as cautious as they had been when they first entered. The thieves had underestimated Clint in more ways than one. They assumed an old man like him wouldn't be able to hear them creeping around his house, but Clint had lived through too many dangerous situations to be caught off guard by something so simple. As the group fumbled their way through the rooms, they started to overlook their surroundings. They were too focused on finding valuables. They didn't notice the faint glow of the security cameras hidden in plain sight, or the small tripwires in the corners of the room that would signal Clint's next move. Another mistake came when one of the thieves, Tom, tried to force open a locked cabinet. In his frustration, he yanked at the handle too hard. The metal creaked loudly, and for a moment it seemed like the entire house had heard him. Tom cursed, his hands shaking as he tried to calm himself down. Clint had been listening the whole time. He could hear the growing chaos in the other room, and he knew it was only a matter of time before the thieves made their next mistake. They were desperate now, rushing their movements, and the more desperate they became, the more mistakes they made. It was clear that they had no idea how to handle a situation like this. Clint was ready. He had no intention of letting them continue for much longer. He had let them dig their own hole, but now it was time to finish it. They had already messed up so many times that it was almost too easy. It was a matter of waiting for the right moment. Clint knew the time had come. The thieves were rattled, making mistakes at every turn. He could hear them scrambling, their nervous whispers filling the quiet house. Clint remained still, his breathing steady. He wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't going to make the first move, he was going to let them make the next mistake. And when they did, he would act. The opportunity came when Mike, the leader, moved toward the back door to check for any signs of movement outside. As he turned to rejoin the others, Clint made his move. He had set a plan in motion long before the thieves had entered. The house, with its many hidden corners and secret compartments, was his domain. It was a place he knew intimately. The thieves didn't know it, but Clint had been watching them from the moment they stepped inside. He had been waiting for the right moment to turn the tables. When Mike turned his back, Clint took his chance. He activated a hidden trap, an old-fashioned but effective method. A system of pulleys and ropes that triggered a loud alarm, blaring through the house. The noise was deafening, throwing the thieves into full-blown panic. The sudden alarm made the thieves jump, their hearts racing. Mike spun around, his face pale. The entire atmosphere had shifted. The quiet confidence they had once had vanished, replaced by fear and confusion. They were trapped. They hadn't accounted for anything like this. They had underestimated the old man, and now they were paying the price. Clint's voice rang out, calm and controlled, but carrying the weight of experience. "You've made a big mistake," he said, stepping out of the shadows, his presence undeniable. The thieves froze. They hadn't expected to see Clint at all, let alone hear him speak in such a steady tone. They had thought they were the ones in control, but now they realized they were in the presence of someone who had lived a life full of far worse danger than they could imagine. The thieves were paralyzed with fear, unsure of what to do next. Clint was standing right in front of them, and they couldn't even think straight. The situation had shifted dramatically, and it was clear that the old man wasn't as easy a target as they thought. He wasn't just a movie star. He was a survivor. The thieves were trapped, surrounded by their own mistakes. Clint moved with quiet confidence, stepping closer to them, never once breaking his calm demeanor. The alarm had done its job. There was no more running, no more hiding. The thieves had nowhere to go. They were cornered. Mike, trying to regain some sense of control, reached for his weapon, but Clint was faster. With one swift movement, Clint disarmed him, knocking the gun from his hand with a practiced ease that showed just how many times he had done this in his life. The others didn't even try to make a move. They were frozen in place, too terrified to act. Clint wasn't angry. He wasn't shouting or threatening them. He simply looked at them, his eyes cold, assessing. "You've got two choices," he said, his voice steady and low. "Leave now, or face the consequences of your actions." The thieves, realizing there was no escape, slowly dropped their weapons. They knew they had lost. Their entire plan had fallen apart because they had underestimated Clint Eastwood. They had thought he was just another old man, another easy mark. But Clint had outsmarted them at every turn. Soon the police arrived, responding to the alarm that Clint had triggered. The thieves were quickly arrested, their attempt to rob Clint Eastwood ending in failure. Clint, without so much as a scratch, watched as the thieves were taken away in handcuffs. It was a quiet victory, one that didn't require much effort on his part. The whole thing had been a reminder to the thieves of one important lesson. Never mess with someone who knows how to survive, and never, ever underestimate Clint Eastwood.